Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as we like to say, wherever you're joining us from. Definitely an atypical Greenbuild, but nice to keep the Ask Nathan tradition going. Definitely become one of my favorite parts of the show. So Nathan, welcome. Great to be with you again, our chief engineer at IWBI.
Thanks, Rachel.
And we're doing a special coronavirus edition today because I suspect that a lot of people in your life are asking Nathan any number of questions as it pertains to coronavirus, because you're a really useful guy to have around. You know about all the technologies, how the disease spreads, what we can do with our indoor environments. So a lot of my questions today are going to be rapid fire questions and myth busting questions about coronavirus and what we can do to protect ourselves and others. But let's start here. IWBI recently launched a brand new designation. It's called the Health Safety Rating. So is that a coronavirus specific rating?
No, it is definitely not specific to coronavirus. I would say it was certainly inspired in part by the current pandemic and the need for a product that building operators and managers could implement that focused on acute health concerns that they could work on with limited to no capital expenditure. But the strategies in it are mostly evergreen ones, things that will be useful in the long term. Some of the aspects or the requirements that we've included in it, in fact, don't have to do specifically with coronavirus at all, but with more related concerns that can be exacerbated by the current pandemic, such as providing flu vaccines, and that we're going into winter now, and that anything to reduce the flu, which in and of itself is a significant disease each year, will help with the already overburdened medical system. Or similarly, Legionella management, always a good idea, especially a good idea now when people are coming back to potentially unoccupied buildings and reactivating the systems.
So a lot of relevance for this moment during the pandemic, but not exclusively applicable, and will have longer legs than just the pandemic period. Okay, now the section of this that I'm excited about, myth busting. So fact or fiction, I'm gonna make a whole series of statements and you tell us whether they're factual or whether they're myths, and then give us a little bit of logic behind it. So first one, fact or fiction, coronavirus is in the air.
It is absolutely true, and that whether we're talking about larger droplets that will fall or the smaller ones that will remain suspended for minutes or hours or days, both of those are definitely in the air, and targeting both of them is an important countermeasure. So the large droplets is where we come from the face shields and the 6 feet away and everything like that. And that is something that we very much should not abandon. But at the same time, there is finally now growing recognition that the coronavirus can survive in smaller particles that will remain airborne. So that's one that staying 6 feet away isn't going to necessarily help you with. And that's why it's important to, well, one, limit occupancy as much as possible, so to be outside, or to increase the ventilation, to increase the treatment of the air, and to avoid recirculating air that may be contaminated.
Okay, let's stay on the topic of ventilation and air treatment. UVC. There's a lot of talk about UVC as a strategy for killing coronavirus as installed within HVAC systems, or I've also seen a lot of promotions for freestanding systems that claim to kill the virus with UVC light. Fact or fiction?
That can also work as long as it is applied correctly. So like the UV, which is a short wavelength radiation that's just below the visible light, it's high energy. It will disrupt the DNA and stop the reproduction of viruses, bacteria, people if it gets into our living cells. So it's definitely something that can be effective. But the important thing is determining the dose and where it's being applied. So a lot of HVAC systems have had a UV system on their cooling coils, which is good good because that's often a moist environment, so there is a potential for mold to grow there. So that's been a great countermeasure there. But the dose often is lower than that because those cooling coils aren't going anywhere. They're just sitting there. So the UV can shine on that for indefinitely and to protect against mold and bacteria there. But another system that is growing in popularity now is the induct systems that are treated on moving air. And those need to be of a higher output because the air is just flying through. So each bit of air only gets exposed for a shorter period of time. So just because there's UV in your ducts already, it may be doing good, but it may not be targeting in a way that can work with airborne diseases.
So be skeptical of claims that UVC on the coils is actually going to have any kind of mitigating effect on transmission for coronavirus.
Right. It's absolutely possible if a dual system is created, but generally they're set up as different systems. And then the freestanding systems that you might install in the corner of a room, those ones are designed to treat moving air, so that's a good thing there. The catch on those is to look at what the capacity is for those. Oftentimes, based on the amount of air that's flowing through them, they're sized for a room that's 500 square feet or 700 square feet or 1,000 square feet, which might be fine for an apartment or a home, but you wouldn't expect one or two of those in an office to be effective.
Got it. Let's talk about masks, everybody's favorite subject right now, or not. So true or false, wearing a cloth face covering only protects you from giving the virus to others as opposed to protecting you from contracting the virus? Fact or fiction?
So there's the strongest evidence that it will protect you from giving the virus to others. There have been a number of studies on that and models, so that it's definitely very effective if you have the virus and you may be asymptomatic, that it's a very wise thing to do to stop the spread in the population. At the same time, there is evidence that there's some benefit for you as wearing the mask as well. So in case there are people around you that are infected. And because of this, it's actually very important not to get the masks that might have like the exhaust valve on it. That those are popular, say, in the hazardous material if you're doing asbestos removal because you're breathing out the air. That doesn't need to be filtered because the asbestos is outside. But in those cases, that just completely avoids filtering any air that you're breathing out. So that eliminates one of the largest benefits of the population wearing masks. Good
guidance. I see a lot of people wearing those like Home Depot style masks with like that little square. Looks like that's the ventilator that you're talking about, right? So people can identify it.
Yeah, or there's ones that look more like the traditional mask, but you'll see a little ventilator on the side that's there. Anything that there's a little flap that basically opens when you exhale, that means that you're not filtering the air that you're breathing out.
Got it. Here's one that comes up a lot. My family has asked me this question on numerous occasions. Can I get coronavirus from touching my groceries?
It is possible, but it is theoretically possible that it's there. But when we've been talking about wearing a mask and social distancing, of all of those things, cleaning your iPhone and wiping down your groceries is almost just distractions overall. That it's a good thing to do, but if you're doing that in lieu of any of these other tactics, then you're really wasting your time.
Okay, last fact or fiction question, and then I'm going to move on to another section. Let's talk about immunity. What you eat and what you drink can make a difference in terms of the severity of coronavirus if you do indeed contract it. Fact or fiction?
That is absolutely true, too. That we've seen that many of the hospitalizations and the deaths that result from coronavirus are from the more vulnerable population, people with pre-existing conditions, which are often a result of like malnourishment or food, the type of food that people are eating, or if they get enough exercise that is there. So if you start eating only vegetables today, you're not going to find yourself by Friday significantly better off. It seems to be in this for the long term. So if you had started eating vegetables and exercising in March, then by today, your immune system would definitely be stronger and you'd be in better shape against the coronavirus.
Well, we're far from the end of the pandemic, at least here in the United States. Yeah. So there's never been a better time to start eating better and get well, yeah?
That's absolutely true. Like the daily cases today in the U.S. are twice what they were in the second peak and 4 times what they were in the spring peak, and they still are showing no time of actually reaching the peak.
All right, let's move to the next section, which is all about translating coronavirus to 5-year-olds. I would make a political joke right now, but we try to stay above board on these matters. So I'll just say you have a 5-year-old, and you have thought a lot about how you can translate things to your daughter so that she can really apply best practices readily as she's out in the world. So how would you describe to a 5-year-old the 3 most important things that you can do to protect yourself in public?
I think that it's a lot of the similar things we would tell adults. It's to wear a mask and don't get too close to people unless you need to. And then also, especially for 5-year-olds, wash your hands. It's a good idea here. And we've talked about how the surface contact of coronavirus is probably not the main source, but it's a possible source. And if you're a 5-year-old, who knows what you've been touching? So wash your hands anyway.
For sure. You never know what 5-year-olds have been touching. All right, let's talk about going out to eat. There's a lot of concern about the fact that the weather is getting too cold for outdoor dining. Tell us a little bit about the risks of dining out. What are the risks and what are the precautions that we should all be taking if we're electing to eat indoors in the coming months?
Yeah, I would say that there's definitely potential risks for going out to eat now, because as we've been discussing, wearing a mask is one of the most important things. So that's something you are definitely not doing while you're eating. And that you should, being outside is a huge benefit, but as more and more of these outside dining locations are putting up walls and roofs, they're really approximating indoor locations. And to be fair, some of them actually are treating them as indoors. They just know that they can only have dining at 25%. So if they can add more total space, they can up that numbers. But others may be trying to put that in as the guise of being outdoor seating. And if there's not enough air movement there, that's effectively indoors. And if you're in close contact with people that are not wearing masks, that is a risk. In fact, New York just recently they closed down restaurants at 10 o'clock at night to further limit the spread. And we're all watching to see what next steps might be taken.
I saw an amazing stat about the prevalence of individuals who had contracted the virus, they think, from indoor dining and other indoor moments of congregation. And yeah, you're right. I mean, those plastic bubbles that I see all over New York and DC, they look like more dangerous than going inside, because smaller space packed with people and no active ventilation filtration. There's no HVAC system inside of one of those plastic bubbles. Do you feel like that's actually more dangerous than being inside a large restaurant that's operating at reduced capacity?
I think it is. I think that if it's not truly outdoors, if you have all of these walls around it, it's approximating an indoor location, and it needs to be treated as such.
So I'm going to stay on the topic of coronavirus, but pivot back to Well, because we just recently debuted Well version 2 out of pilot. And the reason why that launch was delayed was because at the start of the pandemic, you and I elected to press pause on bringing the pilot version to vote by our governance council so that we could do that final sweep and make sure that we had fortified the system as it pertained to all of the ways in which buildings and organizations could be a part of that fight against the spread of the virus. So we formed a task force. 600 people helped us to crowdsource best practices related to and specific to what we knew about COVID-19, especially in indoor environments. What changed as a result of that task force in the final version of Well V2?
So one of the things we found is that a lot of Well was very robust, that much of what we had included certainly wasn't in conflict with any of the new recommendations, and in fact was aligned with what people have been promoting now. Our mind concept has been focusing on mental health for years, which is now a much more mainstream concern. We've been looking to increase ventilation, in this case, since to deal with sick building syndrome or to reduce carbon dioxide levels, but it's also the same recommendations that are happening for coronavirus here. We did find a couple of changes that we wanted to make. One of the shifts we were making as Well V2 came out of pilot was focus on more active education instead of passive things that people could read, like live in-person classes on cooking, on exercise, on yoga, on mental health. And that we found that encouraging live in-person classes is the last thing we want to do at the moment, and that the education industry has largely stepped up to the challenge on how to deliver effective education remotely. It's still very much different from like sending out an email or one of those compliance trainings that you need to watch. Like there's actually real high quality stuff out there. So one of the changes we made was pivoting to say, yes, virtual education is something that's okay as part of this. Another, going back to a previous point about avoiding recirculating air, is that previously within the air concept, we targeted filtering the outdoor air for particles, because dust and pollution from traffic fires, that's generally where particles come from. Treating the cooling coils with UV for bacteria, as I discussed, and treating recirculated air for VOCs, because those largely are emitted from furniture. But we had several recommendations, and we ultimately made the change to adjust that recirculation feature to focus actually on not recirculating air at all, to use 100% outdoor air to avoid recirculating air that might be contaminated, or that also might contain VOCs, or if the air is recirculated, to treat it not only with the carbon filters for the VOCs, but also with UV systems in ducts or with particle filters that are rated sufficiently to target the virus.
Terrific. So like you said, broader applications than just addressing COVID-19. These types of things will come in handy during flu season, or even for addressing VOC emissions, for instance, from furniture and other fixtures and fittings. Okay, now to close us out, Nathan, we'll do a series of rapid fire questions again, sticking on the V2 theme. What's your favorite change from the pilot to V2 in full?
So one of the things, when we were developing Well V2 and bringing it out of pilot, we knew that it was very much still Well V2. This wasn't V3. So while we had some changes that resulted from the task force, a number that we consulted with our advisory as a result of the public comments that we held last year, that by and large, the overall rating system is still the same, and one that we would recognize that's there. My favorite change has to do with the scoring and the way that we award leadership within the program. That previously there was a flat minimum number of points for within each concept that projects had to achieve to get certified at all. But what we've introduced now is that number varies depending on what the level of certification that's being targeted is. If a project is pursuing silver or now bronze, it's fewer points that are needed than previous, 1 point or 0 even per concept. And if it's platinum, then 3 points are needed per concept. So this really creates more of an entry point for projects that will still, of course, meet all preconditions, but could focus their points on particular areas of the standard to get in at the bronze or silver level, but make the platinum projects really be able to target a breadth of features across the system.
How about beta features? So beta features we introduce as often as on a quarterly basis, and we did that throughout the course of the V2 pilot. We've also released a handful of new beta features since we debuted the final version of V2. What's your favorite beta feature?
Now, I might be a little bit biased as the air and thermal comfort concepts lead, but I'm going to talk about our feature TO8, which is the enhanced offerable windows now. So previously we had offerable windows within our air concept as a way to promote ventilation within the system, but this is included now to have those same operable windows either minimize thermal discomfort or actually improve thermal comfort in ways. And simply speaking, what it requires is that there's two modes of operating the windows, that they can either be opened near the top, ideally close to the ceiling, or near the bottom, where close to where people are and where they might feel the wind that's coming through there. And that allows it to be used below when it's warm, when you want the draft, and in the top when it's cold out and you just need some fresh air, but you don't want it to be hitting the people that's there. And I think that that's going to be very important as we go into winter now, to remind people that it's still possible to have these open windows in a way that won't compromise thermal comfort. In fact, my parents live in Vermont, and they've been meeting people and having drinks on their porch, but have been putting up all of, what do they call them, storm windows, but basically frames with plastic that's set between them that will basically block the wind and the air movement all around. My dad would always joke, he said, and this is kind of turning indoors almost. I said, yes, that's exactly true. But one thing that you can do is, as you're putting these in, leave an opening at the top. Put in a 6-inch barrier, or separate window on the top that you can open there. And then as it gets cold, that will let the fresh air in along the top. And by the time it gets down to you, it will have warmed up some and you won't feel the draft.
Wow.
So that's what they've been adding more of the windows.
I'm eager to see some photos of the Vermont hacks by your parents. Okay, Nathan, final question to bring us home. One thing that we did away with in Well version 1 that you're really happy about? What's one thing that met the chopping block sometime between the pilot and the release of V2 that you were happy to see go?
I think this is on the same line as the previous point that I talked about, whereas in Well V1, we had a different scoring structure where there was a lot of preconditions, and when you met all of the preconditions, you were at silver. And then you got a certain number of optimizations to get gold or platinum. And this had two effects. One, it made all of the silver projects basically pursuing all of the same features, so there wasn't a lot of variety, but also that in some cases, some of those were very unfriendly to existing buildings, so that it was tough for them to get in if they saw one design-related thing that they were unable to change. So now in Well V2 and within the pilot, when you've met all of the preconditions, which is a much smaller number, you're now at 0 points and can start earning those optimizations towards getting your level of certification. So that creates a lot more flexibility with strategies that projects can use while still maintaining the rigor of having a lot of health-related techniques that they need to implement.
Terrific. And if folks want to learn more about Well version 2, where should they go?
So you can go wellcertified.com, and that is our overall homepage. You can go to v2.wellcertified.com. That will let you browse that rating system right away. It has a link to our health safety rating, or if you're feeling nostalgic, to look at the pilot or even Well V1.
Excellent. Nathan, thank you so much. Ask Nathan is always such a joy, and no matter what, I always feel like I learned something new when I talk to you. So thanks for being the steady hand that guides all of our well-related standard development, and thank you for all of the great insights and practical strategies that you shared today.
All right, thank you, and have a good day, everyone.
Have a great day. Happy Greenbuild.